Okay, we're back for part 17. We're catching up. And apparently this is one of Anna's favourite parts, although, as she says yesterday, that's pretty much any given part, although there are more really, really good bits as you get towards the end. So, here we go, part 17. There were a lot of explosions. The firecrackers bounced all over the street. Tambourines thudded, a horn blared a chord unknown to nature, and a line of monks danced and twirled around the corner, all chanting at the tops of their voices. Vimes, sagging to his knees, was aware of dozens of sandaled feet gyrating past and grubby robes flying. Rust was yelling something at the dancers, who grinned and waved their hands in the air. Something square and silvery landed in the dirt. And the monks were gone, dancing into an alleyway, yelling and spinning and banging their gongs. "Wretched heathens," said Rust, striding forward. "Have you been hit, Sergeant?" Vimes reached down and picked up the silver rectangle. A stone clanged off Rust's breastplate. As he raised his megaphone, a cabbage hit him on the knee. Vimes stared at the thing in his hand. It was a cigar case, slim and slightly curved. He fumbled it open and read, "To Sam, with love from your Sybil." The world moved. Vimes felt like a drifting ship, but at the end of the tether there was now the tug of an anchor, pulling the ship around so that it faced the current. A barrage of missiles was coming over the barricade. Throwing things was an old Ankh-Morpork custom, and there was something about Rust that made him a natural target. With what dignity he could muster, he raised the megaphone again and got as far as, "I hereby warn you," before a stone spun it out of his hand. "Very well then," he said, and marched stiffly back to the squad. "Sergeant Keel, order the men to fire. 1 round of arrows over the top of the barricade." "No," said Vimes, standing up. "I can only assume you've been stunned, Sergeant," said Rust. "Men, prepare to execute that order." "First man that fires, I will personally cut that man down," said Vimes. He didn't shout. It was a simple, confident statement of precisely what the future would hold. Rust's expression did not change. He looked at Vimes up and down. "Is this mutiny then, Sergeant?" said the captain. "No, I'm not a soldier, sir. I can't mutiny." "Martial law, Sergeant!" snapped Rust. "It is official!" "Really?" said Vimes, as another rain of rocks and old vegetables came down. "Shields up, lads." Rust turned to Fred Colin. "Corporal, you will put this man under arrest." Colin swallowed. "Me?" "You, Corporal, now!" Colin's pink face mottled with white as the blood drained from it. "But he began. "You won't? Then it seems I must," said the captain. He drew his sword. At that, Vimes heard the click of a crossbow's safety catch going off, and groaned. He didn't remember this happening. "You just put that sword away, please, sir," said the voice of Lance Constable Vimes. "You will not shoot me, you young idiot! That would be murder," said the captain calmly. "Not where I'm aiming, sir." Bloody hell, thought Vimes. Maybe the lad was simple, because one thing Rust wasn't was a coward. He thought idiot stubbornness was bravery. He wouldn't back down in the face of a dozen armed men. "Ah, I think I can see the problem, Captain," Vimes said brightly. "As you were, Lance Constable. There's been a slight misunderstanding, sir, but this should sort it out." It was a blow he'd remember for a long time. It was sweet. It was textbook. Rust went down like a log. By the light of all his burning bridges, Vimes slipped his hand back into his hip pocket. "Thank you, Mrs. Goodbody, and your range of little equalizers." He turned to the watchmen, who were a tableau of silent horror. "Let the record show Sergeant-at-Arms John Keel did that," he said. "Vimes, what did I tell you about waving weapons around when you're not going to use them?" "You laid him out, Sarge," Sam squeaked, still staring at the sleeping captain. Vimes shook some life back into his hand. "Let the record show that I took command after the captain's sudden attack of obvious insanity," he said. Waddy, Wiglet, drag him back to the house and lock him up, will you? What are we going to do, Sarge? Wailed Colin. Keep the peace. That was the thing. People often failed to understand what that meant. You'd go to some life-threatening disturbance, like a couple of neighbours scrapping in the street over who owned the hedge between their properties, and they'd be both bursting with aggrieved self-righteousness, both yelling. Their wives would either be having a private scrap on the side, or would have adjourned to the kitchen for a shared pot of tea and a chat, and they all expected you to sort it out. And they could never understand that it wasn't your job. Sorting it out was a job for a good surveyor and a couple of lawyers, maybe. Your job was to quell the impulse to bang their stupid fat heads together, to ignore the affronted speeches of dodgy self-justification, and to get them to stop shouting and to get off the street. Once that had been achieved, your job was over. You weren't some walking god dispensing finely tuned natural justice. Your job was simply to bring back peace. Of course, if your few strict words didn't work, and Mr. Smith subsequently clambered over the disputed fence and stabbed Mr. Jones to death with a pair of gardening shears, then you had a different job, sorting out the notorious hedge argument murder. But at least it was one you were trained to do. People expected all kinds of things from coppers, but there was one thing that sooner or later they all wanted. Make this not be happening. Make this not be happening. What? He said, suddenly noticing a voice that had, in fact, been on the edge of awareness for some time. I said, was he insane, Sarge? Excuse me. But when you're falling off the cliff, it's too late to wonder if there might have been a better way up the mountain. He asked you to shoot at people that weren't shooting back, growled Vimes, striding forward. That makes him insane, wouldn't you say? They are throwing stones, Sarge, said Colin. So, stay out of range. They'll get tired before we do. In fact, the barrage of missiles from the barricade had ceased. Even in a time of crisis, the people of Ankh-Morpork would stop for a decent piece of street theatre. Vimes walked back towards them, stopping on the way to retrieve Rust's bent megaphone. As he approached, he cast his eye over faces just visible through the chair legs and junk. There would be unmentionables somewhere, he knew, helping matters along. With luck, they wouldn't have bothered with Whalebone Lane. There was muttering from the defenders. Most of them had a look Vimes recognised, because it was the one he was trying to keep off his own face. It was the look of people whose world had suddenly been swept out from under them, and now they were trying to tap dance on quicksand. He tossed away the stupid, pompous megaphone. He cupped his hands. "Some of you know me," he shouted. "I'm Sergeant Keel, currently in command of the Treacle Mine Road Watch House, and I order you to dismantle this barricade." There was a chorus of jeers and one or two badly thrown missiles. Vimes waited, stock still, until they died away. Then he raised his hands again. "I repeat, I order you to dismantle this barricade." He took a breath and went on. "And rebuild it on the other side, on the corner with Cable Street, and put up another one at the top of Shear Street, properly built. Good grief, you don't just pile stuff up, for God's sake. A barricade is something you construct. Who's in charge here?" There were the sounds of consternation behind the overturned furniture, but a voice called out, "You?" There was a nervous laughter. "Very funny. Now laugh this one off. No one's interested in us yet. This is a quiet part of town. But when things really go bad, you're going to have cavalry on your backs. With sabres. How long would you last? If you shut off this end of Treacle Mine and the end of the end of Shear, then you're left with alleyways. And they don't like that. It's up to you, of course. We'd like to protect you, but me and my men will be behind the barricades over here." He turned on his heel and marched back to the waiting watchmen. "Right, lads," he said. "You heard. Pounce and Gaskin, you take the hurry-up wagon up to the bridge and turn it over. Waddy and Nancy Ball, and you too, Fred, go and nick some carts. You grew up around here, so don't tell me you've never done that before. I want a couple of blocking the streets down here, and the rest, I want you to run them into the alley mouths until they wedge. You men know the area. Block up all the little backways." Colin rubbed his nose. "We could do that on the riverside, Sarge, but it's all alleys on the Shades side. We can't block 'em all." "I wouldn't worry about those," said Vimes. "Cavalry can't come through there. You know what they call a horse in the Shades?" Colin grinned. Yeah, Sarge, lunch. Right, the rest of you, get all the benches and tables out of the watch house. It dawned on him that none of the men had moved. There was a certain problem in the air. Well? Billy Wiglet removed his helmet and wiped his forehead. How far is this going to go, Sarge? All the way, Billy. But we took an oath, Sarge, and now we're disobeying orders and helping rebels. Doesn't seem right, Sarge, said Wiglet wretchedly. Excuse me. You took an oath to uphold the law and defend the citizens without fear or favour, said Vimes, and to protect the innocent. That's all they put in. Maybe they thought those were the important things. Nothing in there about orders, even from me. You're an officer of the law, not a soldier of the government. One or two of the men looked longingly at the other end of the street, empty and inviting. But I won't stop anyone who wants to walk, said Vimes. They stopped looking. Hello, Mr. Keel, said a sticky voice behind him. Yes, Nobby, he said, without turning around. Here, how did you detect it was me, Sergeant? It's an amazing talent, kid, said Vimes, turning, against all wisdom, to look at the urchin. What's been happening? Big riot in Satter Square, Sarge. They say people have broke into the Dolly sisters' watch house and thrown the lieutenant out the window. And there's looting all over the place, they say, and the day watcher out chasing people, only most of 'em are hiding now, 'cause... Yeah, I get the picture, sighed Vimes. Carcer had been right. Coppers were always outnumbered, so being a copper only worked when people let it work. If they refocused and realised you were just another standard idiot with a pennyworth of metal for a badge, you could end up as a smear on the pavement. He could hear shouting now, a long way off. He looked around at the hesitant watchman. On the other hand, gentlemen, he said, if you are going to leave, where are you going to go to? The same thought had clearly occurred to Colin and the others. We'll get the carts, he said, hurrying off. And I wants a penny, said Nobby, holding out a grubby hand. To the boy's amazement, Vimes gave him $1, saying, and just keep telling me everything, will you? Tables and benches were already being dragged out of the watch house, and after only a couple of minutes, Waddy had arrived with a cartload of empty barrels. Barricades were easy in these streets. It was keeping them clear that had always been the problem. The watchmen set to work. This was something they understood. They'd done it when they were kids, and perhaps they thought, hey, this time we're wearing uniforms. We can't be in the wrong. While Vimes was struggling to wedge a bench into the growing wall, he was aware of people behind him. He worked steadily, however, until someone gave a delicate cough. Then he turned. Yes, can I help you? There was a small group of people, and it was clear to Vimes that this was a group pushed together out of shared terror, because by the look of them, they'd have nothing to do with one another if they could possibly avoid it. The spokesman, or at least the one in the front, looked almost exactly the kind of person Vimes had pictured when thinking about the Hedge argument murder. Officer? Yes, sir, said Vimes cheerfully. What, are you doing exactly? Keeping the peace, sir. This peace, to be exact. You said that, there's rioting and soldiers on the way? Very likely, sir. You don't have to ask him, Rutherford. It's his duty to protect us, snapped the woman who was standing with an air of proprietorship beside the man. Vimes changed his mind about the man. Yes, he had that furtive look of timid domestic poisoner about him, the kind of man who'd be appalled at the idea of divorce, but would plot woman slaughter every day, and you could see why. He gave the lady a nice warm smile. She was holding a blue vase. How can I help you, ma'am? He said. What are you intending to do about us being murdered in our beds? She demanded. Well, it's not 4 o'clock yet, ma'am, but if you'll let me know when you want to retire. Vimes was impressed at the way the woman drew herself up. Even Sybil, in full Duchess mode, with the blood of 20 generations of arrogant ancestors behind her, could not have matched her. Rutherford, are you going to do something about this man? She said. Rutherford looked at Vimes. Vimes was aware that he was villainously unshaven, dishevelled, dirty, and probably starting to smell. He decided not to load more troubles on the man's back. Would you and your lady care to share our barricade? He said. Oh, yes, thank you very... Rutherford began, but was outgunned again. Some of that furniture looks very dirty. said Mrs. Rutherford. "And aren't those beer barrels?" "Yes, ma'am, but they're empty ones," said Vimes. "Are you sure? I refuse to cower behind alcohol. I've never approved of alcohol, and neither has Rutherford." "I can promise you, ma'am, that any beer barrel in the presence of my men for any length of time will be empty," said Vimes. "You may rest assured on that score." "And are your men sober and clean living?" the woman demanded. "Whenever no alternative presents itself, ma'am," said Vimes. This seemed acceptable. Mrs. Rutherford was like rust in that respect. She listened to the tone of voice, not the words. "I think perhaps it would be a good idea, dear, if we made haste to—" Rutherford began. "Not without father," said his wife. "No problem, ma'am," said Vimes. "Where is he?" "On our barricade, of course, which was, let me tell you, a rather better barricade altogether." "Jolly good, ma'am," said Vimes. "If he'd like to come over here, we'll—" "You don't quite understand, sir," murmured Rutherford. "He's, on the barricade." Vimes looked at the other barricade, and then looked harder. It was just possible to see, near the top of the piled-up furniture, an overstuffed armchair. Further examination suggested that it was occupied by a sleeping figure in carpet slippers. "He's very attached to his armchair," sighed Rutherford. "It's going to be an heirloom," said his wife. "Be so kind as to send your young men to collect our furniture, will you? And be careful with it. Put it in the back somewhere where it won't get shot at." Vimes nodded at Sam and a couple of the other men as Mrs. Rutherford picked her way over the debris and headed for the watch-house. "Is there going to be any fighting?" said Mr. Rutherford anxiously. "Possibly, sir." "I'm not very good at that sort of thing, I'm afraid." "Don't worry about that, sir." Vimes propelled the man over the barricade and turned to the rest of the little group. He'd been aware of eyes boring into him, and now he traced the rays back to their source, a young man in black trousers, a frilly shirt, and long curly hair. "This is a ruse, isn't it?" said the man. "You'll get us in your power, and we'll never be seen again, eh?" "Stay out then, Reg," said Vimes. He cupped his hands and turned back to Whalebone Lane barricade. "Anyone else wants to join us had better get a move on," he shouted. "You don't know that's my name," said Red Shoe. Vimes stared at the big protruding eyes. The only difference between Reg now and the Reg he'd left back in the future was that Corporal Shoe was rather greyer and was held together in places by stitches. Zombiehood would come naturally to Reg. He was born to be dead. He believed so strongly in things that some kind of inner spring kept him going. He'd make a good copper. He didn't make a very good revolutionary. People as meticulously fervent as Reg got real revolutionaries worried. It was the way he stared. "You're Reg Shoe," he said. "You live here in Whalebone Lane." "Aha! You've got secret files on me, eh?" said Reg, with terrifying happiness. "Not really, no. But if you'd be so good—" "I bet you've got a big file on me a mile long," said Reg. "Not a whole mile, Reg, no," said Vimes. "Listen, Reg, I demand to see it." Vimes sighed. "Mr. Shoe, we don't have a file on you. We don't have a file on anyone, understand? Half of us can't read without using a finger. Reg, we are not interested in you." Red Shoe's slightly worrying eyes remained fixed on Vimes's face for a moment, and then his brain rejected the information as contrary to whatever total fantasy was going on inside. "Well, it's no good you torturing me, because I won't reveal the details about my comrades in the other revolutionary cells," said Reg. "Okay, I won't then. Now perhaps that's how it works, see? None of the cadres know about the other ones." "Really? Do they know about you?" said Vimes. For a moment, Reg's face clouded. "Pardon?" "Well, you said you don't know about them," said Vimes. "So, do they know about you?" He wanted to add, "You're a cell of one, Reg. The real revolutionaries are silent men with poker-player eyes and probably don't know or care if you exist. You've got the shirt and the haircut and the sash, and you know all the songs, but you're no urban guerrilla. You're an urban dreamer. You turn over rubbish bins and scrawl on walls in the name of the people who'd clip you around the ear if they found you doing it. But you believe." "Ah, so you're a secret operative," he said, to get the poor man off the hook. Reg brightened. "That's right," he said. "The people of the sea in which the revolutionary swims." "Like swordfishes," Vimes tried. "Pardon?" said Reg, without a hint of recognition. "You're a flounder," thought Vimes. "Ned's a revolutionary. He knows how to fight and he can think, even if it is on the skew. But, Reg, you really ought to be indoors." "Well, I can see you're a dangerous individual," he said. "We'd better put you where we can keep an eye on you. Hey, that's right, you can undermine the enemy from within." The relieved Reg raised a fist in salute and clambered over the new barricade with revolutionary speed. There was some hurried conversation behind the old makeshift barricade, already being denuded of Mrs. Rutherford's furniture. This was interrupted by the clatter of hoofbeats from Treacle Mine Road and a sudden burst of instant decisiveness on the part of the remainder of the crowd. They poured towards the new official barricade, with Lance Constable Vimes bringing up the rear, fairly well hampered by a dining-room chair. "Mind out for that!" shouted a female voice from somewhere behind him. "It's one of a set!" Vimes put his hand on the young man's shoulder. "Just give me your crossbow, will you?" he said. The horseman came closer. Sam Vimes was not good at horses, and something in him resented being addressed by anyone 8 feet off the ground. He didn't like the sensation of being looked at by nostrils. He didn't like being talked down to. By the time they reached the barricade, he'd clambered around to the front of it and was standing in the middle of the street. They slowed down. It was probably the way he was moving, but held the crossbow in a nonchalant way of someone who knows how to use it, but has decided not to, for the moment. "You there," said the trooper. "Yes," said Vimes. "Are you in charge?" "Yes. Can I help you? Where are your men?" Vimes jerked a thumb towards the growing barricade. On the top of the heap, Mrs. Rutherford's father was snoring peacefully. "But that's a barricade," said the trooper. "Well done. There's a man waving a flag." Vimes turned. Surprisingly, it was Reg. Some of the men had brought out the old flag from Tilden's office and stuck it to the barricade, and Reg was the sort to wave any flag going. "Probably high spirits, sir," said Vimes. "Don't worry, we're all fine." "It's a damn barricade, man! A rebel barricade!" said the second trooper. "Oh boy," thought Vimes, "they have shiny, shiny breastplates, and wonderfully fresh pink faces." "Not exactly. In fact, it's... Are you stupid, fellow? Don't you know that all barricades are to be torn down by order of the patrician?" The third horseman, who had been staring at Vimes, urged his horse a little closer. "What's that pip on your shoulder, officer?" he said. "Means I'm sergeant-at-arms, special rank. And who are you?" "He doesn't have to tell you that," said the first trooper. "Really?" said Vimes. The man was getting on his nerves. "Well, you're just a trooper and I'm a bleeding sergeant, and if you dare speak to me like that again, I'll have you down off that horse and thump you across the ear, understand?" Even the horse took a step backwards. The trooper opened his mouth to speak, but the third horseman raised a white-gloved hand. "Oh dear," thought Vimes, focusing on the sleeve of the red jacket. The man was a captain. Not only that, he was an intelligent one by the look of him. He hadn't mouthed off until he'd had a chance to assess the situation. You got them sometimes. They could be dangerously bright. "I note, Sergeant-at-Arms," said the captain, enunciating the rank with care and without apparent sarcasm, "that the flag over the barricade is the flag of Ankh-Morpork." "It's the one out of our watch-house," said Vimes, and added, "Sir, you know that the patrician has declared that the building of barricades is an act of rebellion?" "Yes, sir." "And?" said the captain patiently. "Well, he would say that, sir, wouldn't he?" The faintest hint of a smile skimmed across the captain's face. "We can't allow lawlessness, Sergeant-at-Arms. If we all disobeyed the law, where would we be?" "There's more coppers per person behind this barricade than anywhere else in the city, sir," said Vimes. "You could say it's the most law-abiding place around." Now there was the sound of raised voices from behind the barricade. We own all your helmets, we own all your shoes, we own all your generals, touch us and you'll lose. Moporkia, Moporkia, Moporora. Rebel songs, sir, said the trooper number 1. The captain sighed. If you listen, Hepplewhite, you might note that that is the national anthem, sung very badly, he said. We can't allow rebels to sing that, sir. Vimes saw the captain's expression. It had a lot to say about idiots. Raising the flag and singing the anthem, Hepplewhite, are, while somewhat suspicious, not in themselves acts of treason, said the captain, and we are urgently required elsewhere. He saluted Vimes, who found himself returning the salute. We shall leave you, Sergeant-at-Arms. I trust your day will be full of interest. In fact, I know it. But it's a barricade, sir, the trooper insisted, glaring at Vimes. It's just a pile of furniture, man. People have been spring cleaning, I expect. You'll never be an officer if you don't see straight. Follow me, if you please. With a last nod to Vimes, the captain led his men away at a trot. Vimes leaned against the barricade, put the crossbow on the ground, and fished out the cigar case. He fumbled in his pocket, pulled out the battered carton of little cigars, and with some delicacy slotted them into place. To the left was Cable Street. In front, Treacle Mine Road stretched all the way to Easy Street. Now, if a man could get barricades all the way up to Easy Street, there'd be quite a slice of the lower hub side behind it, which would be a lot easier to protect. We'll do it. After all, we did it. Of course, that'd mean having the Unmentionables headquarters in here with us. It's like pitching your tent over a nest of vipers. We'll handle that. We handled it. A couple of elderly people pushing carts full of miscellaneous belongings approached the barricade. They gave Vimes a look of mute pleading. He nodded forward, and they scuttled through. All we need now is... Sarge? Fred Colin was leaning over the top of the heap. He looked more out of breath than usual. Yes, Fred. There's a lot of people coming across the Ponds Bridge. There's things happening everywhere, they say. Shall we let 'em in? Any soldiers? I don't reckon so, Sarge. It's mostly old people and kids. And my granny. Trustworthy? Not when she's had a few pints. Let them in, then. Said Colin. Yes, Fred. Some of 'em is watchmen. A few of the lads from Dimwell and a lot from Kingsway. I know most of them, and those I don't are known to the ones I do, if you catch my meaning. How many? About 20. One of them's Di Dickens, sergeant at Dimwell. He says they were told they got to shoot people, and most of them deserted on the spot. Quit, Fred, said Vimes. We don't desert. We're civilians. Now I want young Vimes and you and Waddy and maybe a half a dozen others out here, fully kitted up in 2 minutes, understand? And tell Wiglet to organise squads ready to move the barricades forward at my signal. Move them, Sarge? I thought barricades stood still. And tell Snouty he's got 2 minutes to find me a bottle of brandy, said Vimes, ignoring this. A big one. Are we taking the law into our own hands again, Sarge? Vimes stared at the entrance of Cable Street, and was aware of the weight of the cigar case in his pocket. Yes, Fred, he said, only this time we're going to squeeze. Okay, so Anna will read the next section. See you later.